Welcome back to another edition of the Hawk Off the Press podcast. I'm your host, Gazette Hawkeyes reporter John Steppe. Today, I'm joined by Tom Kakert, the publisher of HawkeyeReport.com, the Iowa affiliate of the Rivals.com network. Tom, thanks for the time today.
Oh, love being on with you, John. And welcome to the beat officially. You know, it's been a few weeks, but we've enjoyed having you with us. So it's awesome having you.
Thank you. It's been a kind of a little bit of a whirlwind the first couple of weeks. My first full week on the job was, I think, the week that they moved up to number 3. And then got that Maryland route that was unlike anything else. And then after that, Penn State, which was unlike anything else. And then that Purdue game that you could say was also unlike anything else, just in a much different way and not really the way that Hawkeye fans are hoping for.
Yeah, it's been interesting 3 weeks, and now we've had the week off to everybody kind of recharge the batteries. I think the players needed it more than anybody. They were pretty, I think guys were pretty, the tank was kind of empty and they needed to kind of refuel a little bit and get to feeling better. So now we'll see what happens on Saturday.
Yeah. And it was interesting. Like Samuel Porter was just talking about yesterday having his feet up. And, I think that really does go a long ways there. That's kind of a grueling stretch when you think about it. Let's see, that was 3 teams all in the top 20 that they had to go up against. So you have, and then road trip across the country to Maryland on a Friday, that kind of throws you off. And then it'll be interesting Saturday. And it seems like this is a Wisconsin team that could maybe give Iowa some trouble, considering how good this Wisconsin defense has been and how, well, not great the Iowa offense has been lately.
Yeah. And I always flash back to the 2017 game. And that was Iowa coming off that huge win against Ohio State and then going up to Madison the next week. And, going from scoring 55 points against Ohio State to only having 66 yards of total offense against Wisconsin. And the only reason Iowa put any points on the board was because Josh Jackson picked off 2 passes and returned them for touchdowns. Otherwise, that was a rout. And even 2 years ago, that was a tight game. Nate Stanley hit Tyrone Tracy, a big play, to kind of get him, back in the mix. And it was but Jonathan Taylor ran wild. We forget about that he ran for over 200 yards and he was just the dominant performer in the game. And, we're seeing what he's doing in the NFL now. But, it comes down to, I think, what Iowa, the keys are, I think, what Iowa's offense can do against the Wisconsin defense that's one of the best in the country at stopping the run. And then on the flip side, what Iowa's defense can do to stop Wisconsin from running the ball and making Graham Mertz beat them, because I think that's the number one thing Wisconsin wants to avoid is making Graham Mertz throw the football. He threw it 8 times last week against Purdue, and they won comfortably.
That's incredible.
52 yards passing, but they've got it, at least for last week, they had it going with the two-headed monster they have in the backfield, including the Allen kid, who's a 17-year-old who looks like he's about 25.
Yeah, and I was doing some research on him, and it turns out that he's like an incredible weightlifter too, which I didn't realize. Like, he tweeted a video of what appears to be, cannot independently confirm off the video, but what appeared to be lifting 455 pounds for like 4 reps or something, or maybe it's 5 reps.
Who his first offer was from the University of Iowa.
And wasn't Iowa also one of his finalists too?
Yeah, Iowa was right in the mix. Tim Polasek had done a great job of recruiting him, but obviously he decided to stay close to home. And it would make sense. I mean, he's a Wisconsin kid. It's hard for Wisconsin, just like an Iowa kid. It's harder for them to turn down Iowa. in terms of Wisconsin. But, we've got TJ Bowlers, whose dad played at Iowa, who's on the Wisconsin roster. He hasn't played this year. He's a freshman, but yeah, that it makes sense for him to go there. But I just thought it was funny that I remember Iowa being the first to offer Allen, and now, here he is as a true freshman, a 17-year-old, just crushing it running the football.
It's incredible. And, it's kind of, Iowa knew what they're getting in this. So I guess with that part of the scouting, they knew that part probably pretty well, would be my guess.
And it's really interesting because, a couple of years ago, they recruited Jalen Berger, and he looked really good his first year. And, and now he's not even there anymore. I mean, you thought he was going to be the heir apparent to Jonathan Taylor and be the guy that's there for 4 years that you just get sick of seeing. And then turns out that, they've got these other guys, the Clemson transfer, and now Allen, who are dividing it up a little bit. And they've got that run game. At least last week, they had that run game going.
Yeah. And when you have your number 2 running back with, I think it's as many rushing touchdowns as Iowa's number 1 running back, who's on the Doak Walker watch list, that tells you kind of everything about, okay, their number 2 is up to par with some of the better number 1s across the Big Ten. And that's going to be a challenge. And as you were saying about Graham Mertz, the more that Graham Mertz throws the ball, I think the better for this team. Where I think the numbers are, if it's more than 15 attempts that he throws in a game, he's thrown interceptions in those games 3 out of 4 times. So he throws long enough and he's going to throw an interception.
Yeah, that's why it's going to be so important for Iowa to be able to stop the run and set that tone early. Kayvon Merriweather talked about it yesterday, that he's probably not going to be on the field a whole lot because they're going to play. He said it's a 3-backer game, so Justin Jacobs will be out there, and Dane Belton will be at strong safety. So it'd be a little different look. I remember 2 years ago up there, Iowa came out in a 4-linebacker set for the first play of the game. Now they just had 1 safety on the field, I think, and then and just had 4 linebackers. It was Jack Campbell started for his first game in that game because he was one of the inside backers in that game.
Wow. And now 2 years later, look at what Jack Campbell is now. It's a little bit of a nice progression there for him.
Yeah. Iowa didn't stick with that 4 linebacker thing very long, though. It was only a couple plays and then they kind of got out of it. But it was interesting that Phil kind of dialed up something that was fairly unique to start the game. But I think turnovers. Here's the other key, I think, for Iowa. I think Iowa has an edge in special teams.
Mm-hmm.
I just think they have
punting
an edge
is winning.
There. Yeah, punting is winning. Get the shirt, Ray Gunn. You can go get the shirt. Simple plug. It's for a good charity for Tory Taylor. But Taylor's such a good punter. Charlie Jones really good in the return game. I just think special teams is one area where Iowa can maybe have an edge, because I just look at this game as going to be when I'm looking at this game and trying to analyze it, I come back to 2009 and 2015. Now, 2009 game was 20-10. Iowa won. Incidentally, 2009 and 2015, both 11 a.m. kickoffs in Madison, too, by the way.
Wow, all the stars are aligning here.
The stars are all aligning. I'm trying to find something for the Iowa fans to latch on to here. But, 2009, they had the big interceptions late. Spivey had a really good game. They were able to, win that game up in Madison. And then the 2015 game, obviously, you remember that 10-6. The goal line play by Nate Meyer. George Kittle catches a touchdown pass. Iowa somehow found a way to win that game. I still don't know how they won that game, but they did. And it was just, that's the kind of game I mean, you look at the over-under, it's 36.5. Lowest total number all year in for any college football game. And I
think you have a pretty good bet taking the under on that.
It's too high.
Yeah.
The over-under is too high. I mean, this could be another, it's, first one to double figures. That's kind of what it feels like.
Yeah, because both these defenses have been great. And you touched on turnovers. I think that's going to be a huge thing.
Yep.
Where we saw it against Purdue, where when this defense doesn't force turnovers, you can kind of have some problems. Granted, Wisconsin does not have a David Bell. That's probably the best news for Iowa after seeing that tape, where it also seemed like there just weren't any adjustments made to David Bell. But you just don't have that on Wisconsin. Jake Ferguson's a pretty good tight end, but that's about as good as you're going to get in terms of the receiving core there.
Yeah, they've got some veteran guys, but they just have not gotten anything going. It's the Mertz thing is so strange to me because that first game that he started last year, 5 touchdown passes against Illinois, everybody's like, whoa, Air Wisconsin, here we go. This Graham Mertz kid, he's now we know why he's starting and da-da-da-da-da. But he finished very quietly last year. Iowa pretty much dominated that game last year in Iowa City. That ended up being the last game of the year for Iowa.
Not that anyone knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, we didn't know that. We thought they were playing again the next week and thought maybe they'd play in a bowl game, but no such luck. But Iowa was able to really frustrate Wisconsin in that game, throttle them in the snow a little bit. You remember the snow coming down at the end of the game. And I thought they did a really good job. And they ran the ball okay. But you look inside the numbers a little bit, maybe it wasn't as good as it seemed because one of the runs was an 80-yard touchdown by Tyler Goodson, where Linderbaum was racing him down the field, almost keeping up with Goodson, which does everything you need to know about Linderbaum. But they still ran the ball, I thought, okay. Mekhi Sargent ran it better than Tyler Goodson did, but Iowa's got to find an answer in that run game. They can't expect to go up to Madison and win if they're going to average less than 3 yards a carry, which, right now they're at 3.1. And you're going to have to figure out a way to run the football or discover a pass game. And they got to figure out a way to get the ball to the playmakers. We talked, I asked Brian Ferentz about that last week. Just Tyrone Tracy's sitting at 83 yards receiving this year.
Yeah, which is incredible because you would have thought that he would have been the top target there. But then you have a Keegan Johnson who's been kind of getting these big plays. You have an Arlen Bruce who's coming in and getting a snap here, snap there, and having some contributions. It's kind of a crazy, like if you have told me that would have been Tyrone Tracy's stat line at the bye week, I would have thought that you were on something.
Yeah, it's been weird that he has not clicked this year. I don't know what it is, and they've got to get more reps for Keegan Johnson and try and get him on the outside and get him in one-on-one matchups because I think he can win a lot of those. And it's worth taking a shot with those too.
Oh, yeah.
And I think getting the ball in the hands of Arlen Bruce is important because he just seems to be able to make some plays with his feet. And so you figure out, jet sweeps or something, get the ball in his hands a little bit more. And figure out a way to get Goodson out in space, maybe run some screen plays, something like that to kind of loosen that defense up. There's a lot of ways, and Brian Ferentz talked about tweaking things a little bit. Maybe those are some of the tweaks. You can't. It's impossible to overhaul it.
Yeah, not in a bye,
and they're not going to. I mean,
yeah.
Here's the thing I always say about Brian and because people complain about Kirk's offense and it being so conservative. I always look at it like. Brian, being who he is allowed to color outside the lines of what Kirk kind of wants more than any other offensive coordinator that could exist in the world because he's his son. I think he's got a little more leeway than a Ken O'Keefe or a Greg Davis did. So he can color outside the lines. We've seen that with the Wildcat last year. Kirk used to get the Kirk Ferentz snort with the Wildcat. What are we going to do? Run the Wildcat? Just snort about it. It's just
And now we see it.
Now,
And it
now
sounds like we're going to see it more too.
But it's disappeared. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, it sounded like with Brian Ferentz last week that the Wildcat is still in the playbook. So we'll see. They need something to get that running game started because, as you were saying, you can't do that with 3 yards. I mean, 3.1 yards per carry compared to Wisconsin, I think it's 4.7. That's a pretty big discrepancy there with 1.6 yards per carry difference there. Yeah. That adds up.
And last year, Iowa hit their marker. They always say, they want to have X number of explosive runs and they want to get 4.5 yards per carry. And they did that last year. They hit the 4.5 and you saw the offense was better. It wasn't like they were living off turnovers. And this year it's kind of like the offensive line just hasn't come together. And I don't know if it's because they're rotating guys. I don't know if it was because Kyler Schott wasn't there in the beginning of the year. Maybe that would have made a difference. I'm not sure. But I just know I'm curious this week because, listening to Kirk, and I think you probably picked up on it too, it seemed like the bye week was going to be kind of a demarcation line, kind of like a line in the sand where, okay, we're going to make some decisions here, hopefully, about who's going to go on the offensive line and kind of try and build some continuity. Because I just don't think you can build continuity if you're shuttling in at 3 different positions, which they've done. They've shuttled in at both guard positions, and you've seen Jack Plum in there for DeYoung at times at tackle. I just don't think you can build continuity if you don't have the same 5 guys out there.
And it's already tough when you have that, and then you have just the overall youth here, where you have Connor Colby, who was playing high school football a year ago. And I've been impressed with how he's done considering that. But that still doesn't change the fact that, hey, he was playing against Cedar Rapids high school teams at this time last year. And that's a pretty quick development to have to turn the corner there. So I think that's also the challenge too is, okay, you have a young group who isn't really used to this, and then you don't have that continuity.
Sure.
And that can make it even harder.
Yeah, it can. And you're right. And you're talking about 3 new starters too on that offensive line, and 2 of them being at tackle, which is the most, Kirk and Brian will say center is the most important, but as we saw against Purdue, the tackle positions are pretty important when you got George Karlaftis breathing down your neck. You're having some guys that haven't done that against those type of guys. They'll get better. I'm really high on Mason Richmond. I think Mason Richmond is going to be a big time player, but he had a rough day. So did Nick DeYoung. They both had rough days. It would have we really haven't talked about this, but it really would have helped Iowa if Mark Kellenberger would have came back for his 5th year, because then they could have a veteran guy who started a lot of games, but he decided he was done with football and moved on. But he would have been a 5th year senior that could have started this year and given him some experience and stability at one of the tackle positions.
Because it's tough when you have that little experience at the 2 tackles, where you think, wow, if you didn't have Tyler, that would be a really rough offensive line. Where the first question I asked Brian Ferentz last week was about how difficult it is to run your offense that, runs the ball a lot when you don't have that offensive line experience. And his point was, well, it's a good thing that we have, one of his points is it's a good thing that we have Tyler there, because if he wasn't, it'd be even harder. So, which I think is maybe him trying to be optimistic of, well, at least we have Tyler. But I think there is some truth to that too, where you look at the rest of that line and it's a tough challenge there.
I want to kind of throw something at you here a little bit, but I wonder, I thought it was interesting that after the Purdue game, when Kirk was asked about the offensive line, he hinted basically, or he didn't hint, he said it. He was like, hey, I'm seeing some good things up there. Brian's saying the same thing, but the rest of us are kind of looking at him like, I know you guys are experts at this stuff, but what are you seeing that we're not? Because the numbers don't add up.
Yeah. Where I think also it's interesting some of the specific things that Kirk has been saying. Things like, you know, I think it was a while ago he said this, but every play is more experience, that kind of thing, where it's kind of they're getting this great experience. Kind of is almost like maybe a way of saying without saying, hey, I realize that this is inexperienced.
Yeah.
So I think that is some of it too, is okay, maybe they aren't outwardly saying, yeah, it's tough with this offensive line, but they're kind of maybe subtly finding ways to kind of, or maybe they aren't trying to, but subtly it's coming out that they realize that, hey, this is a group that really needs to grow. And I think you look at it, I think the people who are there are trying. I think they've improved a lot, but they're improving from the starting point was that much lower. When you have like redshirt freshman Mason Richmond, true freshman Connor Colby, when you have that level of inexperience, okay, yeah, there's a lot of growth that needs to happen.
I'm interested to see how they perform this week, though. And here's the thing I think maybe that they're latching onto is you have seen some good blocks and you have seen some good runs. You know, I'm thinking of the two first quarter touchdowns that this team has that were just pure offensive were by Tyler Goodson on runs of 46 and 56 yards. One of them in the Indiana game, you know, their first series where he hit one for 56. We've seen kind of the glimpses, and maybe that's what they're, but it's the consistency that's not there. And I think that's what was there last year. You've seen many more negative yardage plays where they've just completely whiffed. And, you know, Goodson's getting the ball and people are complaining about him dancing around. Well, there's two guys standing in front of him in the other colored jersey. What is he supposed to do? You know?
Yeah. There's no other option for him. He has to do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to be a lot more ugly if you don't have him dancing around like that. And I kind of go back to the Purdue game where it was 3rd and 2 at I think it was the 11-yard line for Purdue. And they do the 2 quarterback sneaks. And most years with that offensive line, that's no problem. You can probably get that in one there. But you don't have, when you need that, you don't have the consistency to get 2 yards on 2 tries. 1 yard total.
And what does it say about their faith in that offensive line to give it to Tyler Goodson and let him get those 2 yards on 3rd down? I think that's another thing too, is just, it's like, I kind of wrote something at that point. What's the confidence here in that offensive line and Goodson to get those 2 yards? Because normally that's a handoff to the running back. What we've seen more, and they're trying to vary things up, you know, potty bombs getting carries, you know, and it's all right, but it's just, they're trying to vary up what they're doing. And I get it, but it's, you know, they got to get Goodson going. I mean, he's a first team all Big Ten running back last year. And
he's going to be in the NFL.
He's capable of doing well. So they've got to figure out a way to get him going and get that run game going, because everything, you know, they always talk about complementary football. You hear that a lot with Iowa. That's part of the complement is run the ball, stop the run. That sets up everything else. That sets up 3rd and long on defense where you can get interceptions and turnovers. And for Iowa on offense, it sets up play action where you can get plays down the field. It's all complementary football.
Yeah. And we hear it time and time again, the complementary football, but it's true. It's what needs to happen.
Yeah.
So switching gears here now to kind of the recruiting front, Iowa now with 11 commits so far for the class of 2022. Which of those 11 should Iowa fans most keep an eye on, do you think?
That's a good question.
Because it doesn't seem like there's one clear, it's this person.
Yeah, I would, the guy that I like the most is the guy that's been committed the longest, who's been committed since June 25th of 2019, and that's Aaron Graves out of Gowrie, Iowa, small town kid, but he's a beast. 6'5", 270, just a monster of a defensive lineman that's going to be a really good player. Now, will he come in right away and make a big impact? I wouldn't say that, but I would throw him in there. Also, Caleb Johnson, the running back out of Ohio, depending on what Goodson does after the year, and there's time to figure that out. But there was something written in the Athletic last week with some of the recruiting people just about how, talking to a coach who said that kid's really underrated. So he'd be a guy. I think that just flipped from Cal that maybe you watch, but I think maybe the bigger impact guys are the guys that are potentially still coming and that are still on the board.
A certain player from a certain high school with the word Polk in it might be on that list there.
Yeah, Xavier Wampa, the five-star safety, number one safety in the country. He went to Notre Dame last weekend for the USC game. He's going to Ohio State this weekend for the Penn State game. And he's set his decision date for December 8th. I put in, I think I was the first goofball to do this and put my neck on the line a little bit and put in a future cast for him, a few weeks back. Just because I kept hearing some things. This was before the Penn State game. I threw it out there. More, it was for fun, but some intel as well that Iowa was doing pretty well with him, and it looked like they're trending in a good direction. I still think that. I still do. It's not like it's a done deal that he's coming to Iowa, but I think Iowa is in great shape. I think they've done a terrific job recruiting him. And that, if you would have asked me a year ago or 6 months ago, I would have said it's probably a long shot for Iowa, but they, kind of worked their way back in with him. And I think being close to home, I think maybe some of the NIL opportunities that could be awaiting him as an in-state kid. From that perspective, if you go to Notre Dame, you're just another 4 or 5 star. If you go to Ohio State, you're just another 4 or 5 star competing for that same thing. There's not that there's more opportunities at Iowa probably for him. And you look at
he already has his brand here.
Yeah,
people know
look at this week. Caitlin Clark's doing a partnership with Hy-Vee, and she's the highest rated recruit for women's basketball, and she's getting a Hy-Vee sponsorship, getting money from Hy-Vee. That's one thing I'd send to that kid and say, look, you go to Hy-Vee probably once a week, dude, and you could be all over that in the state of Iowa. You could be a big fish in the Iowa pond. And I think that's resonated with him. The NIL stuff matters. It just does. But also
it's money. People generally like money.
Yes, we all like money. Let's be honest. We all like money. Also, he's looking at how Phil Parker keeps putting guys in the defensive backfield in the NFL. Now, Ohio State does that really well too. And Notre Dame has Kyle Hamilton, who'll be a first-round draft pick. But, there's something to be said for the consistency that Phil Parker has brought to that position and how they've been able to put multiple guys in the NFL. You look at Micah Hyde and Desmond King and Monty Hooker and Josh Jackson, all those guys. I mean, he just puts guys in the NFL
too.
Yeah.
And I kind of have this long belief that if there's an in-state star who then stays at an in-state school, they're kind of beloved in a way that's different than anything else. I think it kind of goes beyond football. Like,
there's also a different pressure too. I mean, I go back to like a Tim Dwight, an Iowa City kid who was a superstar. Tavian Banks, same era, Bettendorf High School kid, that were both like big time superstar prospects at the high school level. But it's a different pressure. But some of these guys really like that. I'll say this too: if I would get Xavier Wampa, they're in the front position, driver's seat. Not a lock, but in great position to get Caden Proctor as well, the offensive lineman from Southeast Polk.
Well, that would be some pretty good news for Hawkeyes fans to get them both.
And I think it puts them. I think they're in pretty decent shape with Kevin Casper's son too, Kyler, who came up for the Penn State game. That was one of those things. Xavier was going to be there, and those guys are really good friends and sat together at the game and like being around each other. They really clicked. They played some 7-on-7 together. So, and Kyler's a 2023 kid. So, if they can get those three, whoa, that's pretty big news.
Watch out.
Yeah, that's pretty big news. So,
and you look at that Penn State game, that was just like a giant gift wrapped perfectly, like Christmas Day for Iowa in terms of recruiting, to have that environment with, what was it, more than 80 recruits there? Yeah. Like, how much better can it get?
It was crazy. And you get the reaction from all those guys, and that's a memory that they have that last year they couldn't get that memory because they weren't allowed in the stadium. And it's hard to recruit when you can't put those kids in that environment and get them to experience what Kinnick is like in a game like that, where it gets dark and, you get the lights going and you have an exciting game and you see the fans rush the field, and the guys who went to the game, they're all rushing the field. They're down there. I was down there in that corner with Xavier Wampa and Caden Proctor and Kyler Casper. We were down in that tunnel area. I think you were fairly near there too.
Yeah, I was trying to swim my way through the crowd. It wasn't the most efficient operation there on my part, but I was trying to get over there.
But it was fun watching the players. The players know those guys, and they were interacting with those recruits, and saw Linderbaum come up to Caden Proctor and grab him by the shoulder pads and shake him and say, "You're coming here." And that's a pretty big message from a guy like Linderbaum.
Oh yeah.
Take a minute and just grab, and Proctor smiled and nodded his head yes, and just that big moment there.
Well, especially because Linderbaum is not the most talkative guy by any means. So when you hear that from him, it's like, oh, wow. Okay, people listen when he says that.
Yeah, he was fired up. He was fired up. But all those guys, they were going to all those guys, basically, you're coming here. You're coming here. So they know. And those guys got to go in the locker room, and you saw some of the videos on like Instagram and stuff like that where they're dancing with all the Iowa players in the locker room. And
I heard that Tyrone Tracy was the best dancer out of the group.
That's probably true. Now they just need to throw him the ball a little more, I think.
So he can do some dancing on the field.
Yes. Yeah, dancing on the field. They'll do a little Billy White Shoes Johnson for the old people who are listening.
You're making me feel very young right now. With
or
that
the Icky Shuffle. Do you know the Icky Shuffle?
It sounds familiar.
Icky Woods. Yeah, there's another one.
Now it's coming back to me a little bit. So
Billy White Shoes Johnson was the first one.
Okay. Well, on that note, thanks, Tom, for the time today.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, John.
My pleasure. Before I wrap up this edition of the Hawk Off the Press podcast, I have a trivia question. So I'll be giving 2 trivia questions, one right now on the podcast, the other in the Hawk Off the Press newsletter this week. If you get both right, you'll be entered to win 2 tickets to the November 20th Hawkeyes game against Illinois. So here's the question. What was the score of Kurt Ferentz's first bowl win? Again, what was the score to Kurt Ferentz's first bowl win? So if you get that question right and the question right in the newsletter, you'll be entered to win the tickets. Instructions on how to submit your answer, along with the second trivia question, will be in this week's newsletter. You can subscribe to the newsletter many different ways. The easiest, though, is just go to subscribepage.com/Hawks. Mike and I will be back for an edition of After the Final Score after the game Saturday. In the meantime, we will talk Hawks later.